Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
I'm Sylvia Earle, explorer at the National Geographic, founder of Mission Blue, and an ocean elder. Thank you, ocean elders, for making this happen.
You're putting up with us.
Yeah.
This is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. And we're glad to be back again and hope everyone's made some time to get outdoors and to get underwater, hopefully. I'm going to try to start sharing the screen, and you can ask questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can during the conversation.
And this is not Sharktober. This is October.
October. Maybe it's Squidtober.
Yeah, there's whatever it is.
So whatever it
got a lot
is,
of legs.
we need to remind
arms.
everyone that
Yes.
the
World
is blue. Uh-oh. Oh my God. We've had some little technical glitches here. So you wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about squid before we really get underway with our guest?
Yeah, typically people think about squid, if they think about them at all, about the giant squid and the undersea battles, the legendary stories about how sperm whales dive down deep into the sea and munch on giant squid, or it looks like giant squid are trying to munch on the whales,
I
but
kind of sucker them.
it's the other way around. But anyway, part of this has come about before we can actually get down into the ocean and see the action such as it is. Sperm whales would appear with big sucker marks on their faces and bodies. Anyway, for a long time, the idea of being able to actually see a giant squid, the biggest invertebrate as long as a bus. Roger Hanlon is the squid cephalopod expert to verify some of these comments in a moment, but they really can be huge, and they're not alone. There are a number of large squids that populate the deep sea, and we're just beginning to be able to get down where they live and see them actually. Most divers encounter little squids like these Caribbean reef squids, and if you're lucky enough to dive at night, you can see them in a different perspective. The colors are different. Go ahead into the night. Rainbow squid. And if you're really lucky, turn out your lights, you might see a bioluminescent squid. Most squids, I believe, and Roger, counting on you to back me up on this, have some form of bioluminescence in their skin. And some, the firefly squid, that unfortunately is the other way that people get to know squid, is calamari, the culinary aspects that humans have imposed on these wondrous creatures. But like fireflies, many of them have their own living light, as well as rainbow colors with the ability to change their colors. So I think it's time to dive in and get with Roger with his crafty means of getting down where the action is.
Yes, thank you, Roger, for joining us today. And just so our listeners know that you are one of the senior scientists at the Woods Hole Marine Biological Laboratory. You've been working with cephalopods around the world, all around the world. Here's one.
Oh,
There's another one.
Yay!
Cephalopods.
In case you don't know what a cephalopod is.
And we've worked with Roger before here at the, off the West Coast. Here's a little ROV. Oh, and talking about these market squids. So dive in with us, Roger.
Okay, well, thanks. It's a real privilege, of course, to be here with you, Sylvia and Liz. And I've always respected the work you've done. It was great collaborating with you sort of physically with the work on the Monterey Bay squid fishery years ago. And yes, we did spend quite a bit of time out there trying to understand the life cycle and the spawning events of that animal, because they live less than a year, or right about a year. So when they get fished, they have to recruit that new population. So protecting the spawning grounds is really the key question ecologically and for sustainability in fisheries. So that was the motivation to do that work, which was funded by a national sea grant program. And my colleague Ken Foote at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution is a world expert in acoustic recordings and soundings underwater. And so the whole idea was to try to understand a key thing, and that is whether the squids, whether they communicate with one another and lay eggs during the day or at night. Because if you know when they're laying eggs, you can make sure you don't fish during that period so that the animals have a chance to lay the eggs for next year's recruitment class. And so that required us to get underwater where the animals are day and night, 24 hours a day for days on end to find out exactly what's going on. And that's what we did. And that's where the ROV and the Aquarius came into operation, where we could get down there and really see what the squids were doing. It's one thing to be on the boat and maybe have your sonar on from the vessel and you might see some blurbs on the bottom and maybe they're squid, but maybe they're fish. And you really don't know what they're doing anyway. So we used three methods. One was the Aquarius, which is, a submersible, manned submersible. And that was the work we did very carefully in concert with all of you.
Mm-hmm.
We also then used an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle, which was operated by via a tether from the boat. And we were able to put that down 24 hours a day and see what's going on right at the level of the egg beds. And then we did some scuba diving. It was pretty deep scuba diving, as scuba diving goes, to ground truth everything we were seeing with those other vehicles. And so it was a pretty, I would say, well-rounded study insofar as we gained a lot of actual data. And it's one thing to have ideas about what the squids are doing, but it's another to really find out what they're doing. And we came up with a big surprise, because the 1957 television program, The Night of the Squid by Jacques Cousteau, is still what a lot of biologists even believe, and that is that the squids only spawn at night and they have these huge mass mating events followed by immediate death. And that was all televised. And it turns out we chased that down historically and looked at what science papers were out there. And it turns out that is so rare, it almost never happens. And in fact,
Wow.
what we found in Monterey was the exact opposite. They spawn only during the day. Only during the day, the complete opposite of what came out on the film, because, there was a real event, but we find out from the oceanographers and others that mass spawning event at night only occurs about once every decade.
Wow.
Once every Jacques Cousteau expedition.
Yeah.
Well, he hit it on the right night, I guess.
Yeah.
It had a lot of influence because, much like the Netflix movie, My Octopus Teacher, it brought a lot of attention to the animals and to the ocean. And I really applaud that. I think it's extremely important. So anyway, back to the work with you, we then published that work with I think very respectable data, hoping that the managers might be able to take that information and to change the management plan. Now, the picture that's up there now are pictures taken during the day, proving that the squids are not in the middle of the water column. The water's about 90 to 100 feet deep, but they're right on the bottom in these small groups of 20 to 30 squids, and they're hovering over that white patch. There's a whole bunch of freshly laid egg fingers. Egg capsules are kind of the size of a human finger. Every one of those fingers has several hundred tiny little eggs, each of which will turn into a tiny little squid.
Little
And so,
squidlet.
It's kind of a miracle that they get to be a grown-up at all, given all the hungry mouths that are out there that just love to munch on squid at every stage, including the eggs, including the little hatchlings, in every
Yep.
stage up till you get to be an adult. And you wonder, your project was funded by Sea Grant, and their interest was probably in how many squid can we take, rather than who are the squid and why, what is their role in the ocean aside from calamari?
Well, there was some beautiful work from the Moss Landing Marine Lab back in the 1970s and 80s. And what they did was they looked at the reproductive condition of the different squids, males and females, on the spawning ground and elsewhere. And most importantly, they created this beautiful map that showed the predator-prey relationships in Monterey Bay up on those shallow areas near Pacific Grove, where all the squids aggregate to mate. And they showed from stomach contents analysis of all the predators, how many predators are depending on squid. And the squids are
Right.
right in the middle of the food chain. The
Yeah.
squid eating a lot of little stuff, but all the big stuff's eating squids. And if
Yeah.
you're around with the middle stuff, the squids, you foul up both ends of the ecosystem.
It's
From
the carbon cycle. It's the nitrogen cycle.
Yeah.
It's the chemistry of the ocean in action. When you see,
Yeah.
this is a little glimpse of the Catalina spawn. It was in February. I had a chance to go with Al Giddings, and we did a little project for National Geographic about the seasonal activity out there at Catalina.
Mhm.
And I was just stunned by not just the abundance of the eggs, but once the females spawned, it was a lot of work, I guess, because they tended to die. But that was like ringing the dinner bell for angel sharks, for lots of different kinds of fish, but also sea lions that would come down and scoop up the dead and dying adults. So it looked like, hey, they're just going to waste, right? No, they go right into the food chain. They're vital to not just when they're alive and swimming around, but at the time of spawning. That is a time of new life springing from the parents who don't make it much longer than the spawning event.
So I'd like to add one little tidbit that we discovered also during our time in Monterey Bay. And that is that during the day, the squids are going down and they're laying eggs, but they were not flopping over and dying right after. The females were going back up into the water column, and they were joining the major school that was about mid-water, halfway between the surface and the bottom. So what we discovered there, combined with some lab experiments that were done out in California, was that the females are not going down and just laying eggs all at once within an hour and then flopping over dead. What they're really doing is they're going down and laying some eggs, going back up to the main school, and then coming back down several hours later, or the next day even, or even the next day, over a short period of 1 to 3 days. So the females are laying successive groups of eggs. Now, this is important for the gene pool and the distribution of genes in the system, because when they go back up, other males are trying to fight over them, and they're taking on new mates, and they have multiple sperm sources, which means multiple sources of DNA. And so
diversity yields strength.
yeah, it's really interesting to think about those dynamics when you see these key behaviors and then you realize what's going on. So
I remember how nice it was, when we were using the Aquarius, because it had that, that great big dome that you could look through, and you could really watch the squid, the kind of the whole way as they're coming up off the bottom, and then, kind of swimming back up together. And it was just, I remember how excited you were to be able to observe those behaviors for, more than just a few minutes at a time.
Well, think about how Jane Goodall and other terrestrial scientists are able to stay in their ecosystem or studying the animals of their choice 24/7 for weeks, for months, for years.
Yep.
And anything that we choose to look at underwater is we catch these glimpses. And bravo, Roger, for staying with the topic, even at great inconvenience and ingenuity and all those other I words to make these little bits of knowledge and then stitch them together to get some idea of what's actually going on.
you're absolutely right. It's not for the weak of heart to do long-term studies underwater. Weather dictates a lot of things, and then the sheer danger, the potential danger of diving. I haven't met any humans who can breathe water yet. And so
Yeah.
you have to remember this at all moments. So, most of my dive sites are shallower than Monterey Bay, which allows us a lot more time for those longer behavioral things. But you're right, we can't do what Jane Goodall and others have done, because studying birds and primates like that is at least a little bit easier than studying our cephalopods.
Just imagine Jane in a helicopter dragging a net or lowering an ROV to look around. And anyway, it's,
Yeah.
or you go as a diver into a forest, and you've got a 20-minute passport, and that's it. And you
But
can only go 100 feet for 20 minutes. And if you go deeper, it's less time. It's just so frustrating.
But this is the sad truth is that, this is the way that many people think of squid.
if they think it all.
If they think of them at all, they
Yeah.
just think of them as, breaded, fried, lemoned, sushi somehow, but not really, giving them the respect they deserve.
If only they knew who they are.
I'd like to add something to that, and that is that just in the past decade, I would say the past 10 years, with lab experiments and field work with squids, different species of squids, including this one, it's been found that the reproductive system, what we call the mating system of how the animals really get around to passing their genes on, is immensely complicated by comparison to even higher vertebrates. And so we've been able to publish this information showing the relative sophistication of the mating system, the behaviors thereof. So this is, they're related to clams and oysters. Cephalopods are part of the phylum Mollusca. They're mollusks. They are really related to clams and oysters, but they couldn't be much different. They have this huge brain, and they do a lot of things with it. And so it's really interesting to see some of the brainy, interesting things these animals can do that require an immense amount of decision making. And so quite a group.
Yes.
This is a little video that will work for me.
That's your happy hunting ground. That's Monterey. That's earlier this year. I would not wish to be a squid on the day that the fleet was there, which is many days actually. It's while they're spawning actually, which is crazy. If you really want to have squid to eat, the last thing you'd want to do is kill them while they're busy making more squid.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. For sustainability, I know at least some of the fishermen are quite concerned about this. For 100 years, squid fishery in Monterey only had 8 to 10 boats working it with these Lampera nets, kind of a miniature purse seine. But now, I even checked this the past week, over the past 5 to 10 years, there have been between 20 and even 50 boats working simultaneously all around the spawning ground. And they're doing it with very large and deep purse seines, not just these smaller, shallower Lampera nets. So, and they're not waiting for the animals to spawn. So this is not a good formula for the animals. And I hope that they would think a little more about the sustainability and start thinking about what these animals are doing and how they can still harvest them, but they need to wait for them to do some egg laying. Now,
well, it may be that we shouldn't harvest them. Eating squid is a luxury, and a lot of them are not eaten by humans. They're used for bait to catch something else. These are wild animals. I think of them more like songbirds or other wild things. They're not just out there as products to be ground up for pet food or to be used to catch something bigger, or even to satisfy our lust for calamari. I mean, they're more valuable, actually, alive in the ocean, keeping the ocean alive, that in turn keeps us alive.
Well, it's really frustrating, to Roger's point about the use of some of these different kinds of gear that they're, using the much longer nets, the nets that could probably damage the eggs at the same time, and then getting the squid before they have actually really had the opportunity to spawn repeatedly. Now that he's been able to show that it's not sort of a one-shot deal, but they're out there for some time, helping to diversify their genetics.
They need good ambassadors like you, Roger. to tell people who they are, not just what they are.
Well, thank you. Liz, you brought up a good point about those nets. These longer, deeper ones are scraping along the bottom, and they've tried to modify the nets so they don't tear up the bottom as much. But guess what's on the bottom? The eggs.
Eggs.
When you disrupt the eggs, they hatch prematurely. And we know from experiments here on the East Coast squid that when you disrupt the egg, if it's not a full-term embryo ready to hatch, they do not survive because their stomach is not formed. And even if they grab something to eat, they can't ingest it. So,
Yeah.
so this brings me to the other thing that we did in parallel with the work with you, and that is with Ken Foote. Ken, the genius he is with all this acoustics, figured out that with side scan sonar being towed right along the bottom, not on the bottom, but maybe, 5 or 10 feet off the bottom and flying over acoustically, if you get the right frequency, and it's a high frequency, it will actually image the eggs. It can differentiate a mostly watery egg finger from other things around it. And we got beautiful data there. And we were able to do a crisscross pattern across Monterey Bay, which that part of the bay is fairly large. We could survey the entire spawning ground in one day in about 6 hours. And that enables you to quantify how many eggs have been laid.
Yeah.
So there's a beautiful tool to assess reproductive success. And we published that in the best journal there is, the Journal of the Acoustic Society of America. Good science, hard to get a paper accepted there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And guess what? No one ever tried to use it as a management tool to this day. And that was 2006. So
Frustrating.
it is frustrating. I mean, we've offered a tool, a way to look at it so that you can give the fishermen some information so that, okay, the eggs have been laid, now harvest the squids. This can definitely be done. It'd be really wonderful if the scientists and the fishers could get together and work together on this.
But you're still encouraging humans to compete with animals who have no choices.
Right.
We have lots of choices about what to eat. It's always, when it comes to squid, it's not food security, it's not necessity, it's truly a choice. And my choice, personally, I'd rather see the squid stay in the ocean or be in the belly of a pelican than in mine.
I'm in your camp, Sylvia, I really am. Just trying to point out that, in the interim, we got to slow down the squids before the eggs get laid. So ecologically, that has to happen. But yes, I'm definitely on board with you on this one.
Yep.
What do they say about the pelican? His beak can hold more than his bellican.
Can hold in his beak enough food for a week, but I'll be darned if I know how, and you can finish the rest.
Yeah, you finish the rest. I can't remember it.
Helen Hillican.
Oh, all right.
Sylvia, I was thinking you were talking about the giant squid early on. Just a comment on the giant squid. Some colleagues of mine and myself included partly looked at the eye of the giant squid.
Huge.
It's the largest eye on planet Earth of any animal.
Wow.
And theoretically and hypothetically, the swordfish has the largest eye that by optical physics rules ought to be the maximum that you can do and make it efficient. But the squid eye is 125 millimeters in diameter, the pupil, versus 90 for the swordfish. So it's way larger. And then the eye orbit, which means where the retina is literally as big as I'm showing you right here. And
Wow.
the optic lobe, just the part of the brain behind each eye, is as big as the brains of small primates. It's just absolutely enormous. And
That's
so
incredible.
Or some, I was going to say politicians. Oh, no, never mind. I didn't say that. No.
well, so the question is, what do they do with such a magnificent, huge eye when they're living 2,000 to 5,000 feet deep, where bioluminescence is the only light source? And so we did a lot of calculations. Dan Nielsen in Sweden was the guy who really led this charge. He wrote the book Animal Eyes, so he's a real genius on this. But the best modeling that we came up with was that big eye is not for looking at tiny little acute particles and all their dimensions, it seems to be evolved and developed to pick up large diffuse areas of mild bioluminescence. Well, where would that come from? Well, diving cetaceans, the diving whales, are bopping down from the surface way down to, you know, 1,000, several thousand feet. And as they push in front of them, as you know, there's a pressure wave in front of that big head, and that lights up bioluminescence. So, you know, that would create that diffuse field of mild bioluminescence. So the idea, best we can do with an idea at the moment, is that that eye seems to be constructed to pick up at a distance of 20 to 30 meters, and the water is that clear at those depths, to see the whale coming.
Yeah.
Because they can't hear them. The squids are deaf to that kind of sonar that the animals have, that the whales have. We know that.
Wow.
They might also be able to pick up, I mean, they have to eat something. They can perhaps identify prey by some luminous blob out there.
They
So-
might, that we just are ignorant of all of this stuff.
But no.
Yeah. We
You
need to spend more time in submersibles at depth.
Yes, you do. Yeah. How about that? I'm all for it.
But, you know, getting back to some of the extractive stuff that's going on with the squid, you know, Monterey's like a little, you know, microcosm of it, but
Yeah, that's nice squid fishing.
it's nice
compared
squid fishing compared to some of what's going on out there. This is one of the squid fleets that kind of came into the news just off the coast of the Galapagos, because there were something like 500 of these ships and these are like ships, you know, hundreds
Yeah,
of
big
feet,
boats,
big,
much bigger
big
than
vessels.
the Monterey fleet.
And
Yeah.
each one of those little arms that comes off the side of the ship is just kind of like a jig type thing that just rotates around and lures the squid, and they
Hooks them.
hooks them, and I believe they were saying that they can take something like, you know, 3,000
I-
tons of squid per vessel per day. These guys are
Which
catching out there.
suggests there are a lot of them, or at least there were.
There were.
You can't continue to take on such a large scale, as we've learned about the king crab in Alaska, year after year after year, taking them by the ton. And now they're wondering, gosh, I wonder what happened. We can't find them anymore. It's happening with squid too. You can't have such a, as you said it about whales once upon a time, such a long and ruthless hunt. How cetaceans could survive that kind of pressure, and obviously they couldn't. But now that we've stopped largely killing the whales, good news is they're beginning to recover. It's not true with squid or with crabs or with almost any other form of life in the sea. We haven't learned yet that there are limits. Look at this. This is at night. Maybe you can talk about how the squids, at least those near the surface, tend to be attracted to the light, maybe to the food that is attracted to the light that attracts the squid.
Yes, this is the fatal attraction that squids have to light at night. They really are attracted. Not every species, but most of them, and especially the open ocean squids where these fleets are going. And so those lights are turned on and the squids are attracted to the lights. They go towards the light and they find food there because smaller fishes and other things are around the light. So it's a little of both. But that means that they're in the vicinity of the ship, but now the ship deploys all these automated squid jig machines. So
Mhm.
it's really a shame in a sense that the squids are out there hunting at night. They have very good night vision. They don't need light to see things at night. Their night vision is superb. But these lights attract them and they get captured that way. And it's really a pity in terms of human exploitation that it's rather easy in some cases to attract them from a pretty long distance. So that's, fishermen exploited one little sensory capability of these animals, and as it, most of them are attracted to light at night. And
Yeah.
And so even in Monterey, real concerns about the nesting pelicans and other birds, that the bright lights that are used to fish for the squid at night, I mean, it's disrupting the behavior of animals that are not accustomed to having those bright lights during the night. And
This is an amazing picture because this is the squid fleets at night from space. And
Off
that's
Patagonia.
Patagonia, and that's
South
how
America.
bright the light is. It can be seen from space. It's just
Right. Like
phenomenal.
a city, really like a city in the sea. There's, and you can see what each of those images represents a day, or rather a night of activity. And it's astonishing how much investment is now being made to extract squid. And they're so important, as you point out, Roger, as the middlemen in the cycle, the chemical cycles that make Earth habitable. It's the larger animals can't access the small things that the squid take. It's the squid, the krill, the other creatures that serve as the passage of food
And nutrients.
and nutrients. And each squid, like every whale, like all animals, they give nutrients back. When they digest what they take, they put nutrients back that are just right to power the phytoplankton that keeps the cycle going. And I think discussions about the importance of life in the sea to planetary chemistry has not been a big topic, I think, until fairly recently. The biogeochemistry aspects of what makes Earth special. But you look at our impact on the creatures of the sea, taking them so many different species by the ton and disrupting these ancient rhythms and patterns of transfer of elements. And that it kind of worked in a magically wondrous way right up until, a few hundred years ago, when we got really good at taking things out of the ocean. And now we've become excessively good. I don't know I have not been able to find, perhaps you have, real numbers that you can trust about the impact of squid fishing on the populations of squid. We have it on some of the creatures such as tunas and swordfish and a handful of others, certainly whales, looking at how they're increasing once we stop the killing. But it's
like how fast can squid bounce back? If we take the pressure off, if we finally got around to getting any kind of meaningful high seas protection, for example.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think, Roger? I mean, what do you think? How fast do you think these can rebound?
Luckily, there's a little bit of good news hiding in there. We'll deal with these oceanic squids. They're different from the nearshore squids. The nearshore squids, like in Monterey, they lay their eggs on the bottom. Beyond the continental shelf, and that's the vast majority of the ocean, there's no bottom to lay eggs on. They lay their eggs in these jelly masses in mid-water and near the surface, and those eggs float around. And they're not harvestable easily by mankind, so to speak, in the fishery world. So they have the capability to bounce back pretty fast, the oceanic squids, because the eggs can't be harmed or manipulated like they can in the shallow nearshore world. So there's a little bit of good news. The other thing is that squids are very fecund. I mean, they produce a lot of eggs, and they reproduce very readily in their short life cycle several times. Now, Sylvia, you asked me about whether any data are out there about recovery of squid stocks relative to fish stocks. And there are some data showing a few of the oceanic species that are, harvested on large scale, that some of those fisheries are doing okay. The good news is if you leave them alone, even for 2 or 3 years, they're going to be a very fast recovery because the animals produce so many young. And so the problem is you can't get out there and quantify this very easily. It's open ocean. It's even harder to study than 100 and 200 feet. So it's a little bit of a yin and yang there, that we don't have great data out there. More people are worried about climate change right now because squids do migrate. They do a vertical migration every night. And the change in the surface temperatures can affect those vertical migrations. There's some very nice scientific studies that have come out on that, which it alters you know, the height and depth of the vertical migrators and the food sources that they're following and the food sources that are eating them. So the climate change will also affect an open ocean animal like that. I don't think people are thinking about that very much even,
No.
but it's really going on. So,
Or
lot of-
the impact on albatrosses and other seabirds that rely heavily on squid, or those that dive down into the deep scattering layer where the squids are doing this vertical migration. I mean, squid are so important to life in the ocean overall and the chemistry of the ocean overall.
Well, you think about some of those big schools of them, like that, enough biomass to, have that many of them taken every night. Think about that vertical migration and just the way that they mix the water.
Yeah.
That is probably a really important thing as well.
I don't know if you realize or the audience realizes, Malcolm Clark in England first did an assessment of sperm whale stomachs. He was the guy who did the dirty work of getting into the stomachs of sperm whales and other whales to find out what they're eating. But it turns out that sperm whales eat almost exclusively squids for their diet.
Wow.
And he made a calculation of how many tons of squid were likely to be eaten in a given year. And this was almost 40 years ago, 50 years ago that he did this. And the numbers were massive. I mean, it was equaling the total tonnage harvesting by people on Earth of other fisheries. But it just shows the huge dynamics of what's going on out there.
Yeah, and when the whales eat the squid, they put nutrients right back in the system.
That's right.
It powers, it's like the big flywheel that goes round and round, and we dive into that and interrupt these ancient rhythms. And in the end, we're going to pay. We are paying because it affects climate and carbon capture.
We're definitely going to pay dearly for this, but it's like a super marine organic gardening going on in the ocean, and maybe people can think about it that way because that carbon cycle is what's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Weather, among other things. Remember that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like hurricanes.
Uh-oh. She's on a quest for something now. Look, she's going to get a book.
No, I'm not getting a book.
Getting a book?
No.
Uh-oh. Oh no. Really?
Ambergris.
She's got ambergris in a jar on the shelf. Unbelievable.
Oh my.
Seriously, there are squid beaks in here.
I'll hold it up so people can. You broke it in half. Oh my God!
That's
Stop
right.
it.
And,
Right, she's damaging the. Oh my God! It's just falling apart.
And
There it is.
anyway,
Oh,
you
it
need
still
a-
smells terrible. God.
it's all in the nose.
But squid beaks are incredible because the beak is like a parrot's beak. It's got a top and a bottom hinge, and it's extremely powerful. I dived once with the Humboldt squid in the Gulf of California.
Oh, they're
And
fierce.
those squids are 4 to 5 feet long and 100-some pounds.
Yeah.
And they've got a beak that's about this big, and it could bite through my forearm with no problem. And I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah,
So-
I had a ROV guy one time say he really wanted to get some Humboldt squid on video. He wanted to know if it was safe to put the ROV in the water with him, and I'm like, yeah, could just like cut right through your cable and it wouldn't be, it'd be bye-bye, and he was kind of rethinking the whole thing. So all is not well in Bikini Bottom is the bottom line here, right?
Squidward.
Squidward.
Oh my gosh, check that outfit out. Yeah.
Yeah. See, even Squidward knows that squid are more important alive than
Cooked.
cooked.
Or
But I really want to get back to, the work that you're doing with the octopus as well, Roger, and just the amazing work around sort of their chromatophores, their ability to shape, shift, and all that kind of remarkable stuff that we see them do.
Well, I'd like to say just a few words. Rapid adaptive camouflage is the term we use. Pretty easily descriptive. But look at the octopus on the left, moments later, goes over by a coral and disappears.
rapid adaptive camouflage. I have to pull that apart from it. Rapid adaptive camouflage,
Yeah.
which means
which means that it occurs in 200 milliseconds. They can change their appearance in
That's
1/5 of 1 second. That's a human eye blink. So that's rapid.
Sure
It
is.
means they can go anywhere on a coral reef, the most complicated, diverse environment on planet Earth, land or sea, and they can assess the visual background, decide what pattern to put on, and they can implement in the skin literally tens of millions of pigmented and reflective cells in the skin, including skin bumps, to create good camouflage. And so, and they have different kinds of camouflage. And it, chameleons are really cool. I love chameleons, but they're
Oh,
just
yeah.
boring compared to a cephalopod, what it does, because it's so fast. And so here's your California species. On the left is octopus rubescens. I took that picture right in Monterey Bay. And then moments later, it goes over in a different habitat on the right. And even though the octopus is filling up 1/4 of the image dead in the middle of it, can you tell that's an octopus?
Yeah, and it looks like a little piece of eelgrass or something.
Yeah, exactly. So they can morph into something else. They can either blend into the bottom or they can look like another animal, which we call mimicry. And they have an arsenal of tricks. And the reason is that, unfortunately, it's in the middle of the food chain and it's the perfect protein meal. An octopus and a squid and a cuttlefish are almost all protein. And they don't have a shell like their other mollusk friends do. And so yum, yum, yum. And so predator vision, which is really superb. And we're talking about the best visual systems in the oceans. Teleos fishes, bony fishes like snappers and groupers and so forth. And cuttlefish can do this too. There's the giant Australian cuttlefish on the left, looking very conspicuous. And it just descended to the bottom, just 2 or 3 feet, and just disappeared in front of my eyes. And that is the same cuttlefish right there on the right, just moments later. And that's a big animal. That's like this big.
Yeah.
in my
Yeah,
eye.
he's just like, whoop, like invisibility cloak,
Right. And so, we studied this for several reasons. I mean, evolutionarily, it's a really interesting phenomenon. This is natural selection at its most refined, defense against good predators. But we're also interested in how the brain controls all that.
Yeah.
What's the visual perception of that cuttlefish looking at its surrounds? What does it cue on? And how does it so quickly integrate all that information and then make a decision in different levels of the brain to get the skin to do everything right? And to do that in 200 milliseconds is sort of a neurobiological shortcut that has driven me and my colleagues crazy for 40 or 50 years, because that's what we're looking for, is that super refined, elegant solution to a complex problem. And so,
Rapid adaptive camouflage, right?
yes.
All right,
Yeah.
got it.
And it's
That's a big takeaway.
but it's more than just like the skin, right? Because they can actually sort of pop up pieces of the skin to mimic like a piece of coral so it's textural too, right?
Yeah.
The
Like-
physical texture, they have optical texture, but they also have physical texture. So look at the squid on the left, is mainly smooth skin, especially on the left side behind the eyes. It's all
Mhm.
smooth skin. If you look at the image on the right, and probably can't see it, all the viewers, but it's got bumps all over the skin, and it produces those bumps. They visually look around them and see how bumpy it is around them, and they reproduce the bumpiness in their skin. So this is like ultimate goosebumps. And
Yeah.
so they can control this. Our lab especially has published this very deeply. And so we're able to show each species has a specific arrangement and set of big and small and intermediate size bumps in the skin. They're called papillae. Each group has a different shape, and each group is controlled independently by different parts of the brain. This
Wow.
is really complicated, cool stuff. And that's why it's so refined. And so the other thing we've done with all this color and pattern, if people ask me what we do in our lab, I say we study color and pattern. Like this color and pattern, large in the most bizarre way. But I've given TEDx talks at Estee Lauder, the cosmetics company, pointing out to them that we know enough about how the pigments and reflectors work in the cephalopods as well as fishes, that you could translate that information to cosmetics so that humans could have some influence beyond blushing or putting on, they use pigments and reflectors in a controllable way. If I'd said this, 20 years ago, someone would have put me in the loony bin. This is actually possible now. We know enough in the biotechnology. And we had a paper with colleagues at Cornell 3 years ago, and the paper was published in Science. And they saw these bumps that the animals had, these papillae, and they got inspired, and they made the first human-made soft materials that could form different bumps and have control of expression all the way up and all the way down with all degrees of freedom. And so it was all based on octopus and cuttlefish work that we had done in our lab. And so you get these smart material scientists and engineers, and they want to make stuff that people want to use, or may have some functionality, or maybe just for fun. And, they get this bio-inspired approach. We provide the principles of how it works from the animal. They take it and make stuff with the gizmos they have. This is human ingenuity in a very positive frame.
I think
Yeah.
so. It's, all the answers, probably all the answers to every question that humans could think of are out there in nature, if we're just smart or maybe wise enough to ask the right questions.
Just pay attention.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we do have some questions lined up in the Q&A box,
Okay.
but we're going to start off by asking you, what the heck is a wonderpuss?
Wonderpuss is a sand-dwelling octopus in Indonesia, not just, all of Indonesia, the Indo-Pacific. And it doesn't like to live on the coral reef and so forth. It likes to get out in those sand plains, and it's adapted itself by having these long, skinny arms. You can't see how long they are in this image. And they have this skinny little body, and they're perfectly adapted to living out in the sand. And this animal can go very camouflaged, unlike this picture, or it could put on this pattern here and various other ones. And the patterns are so bizarre looking that they created the genus name Wonderpuss. Wonderpuss was a nickname that the divers gave, and they made it sort of a Latin genus name. And so Wonderpuss is the scientific genus name.
Oh, that's great. I love it when scientists have fun with their science.
All right.
Definitely having fun with this animal. And
Yeah,
so-
one of our diver Richard sent this or had this on Facebook and asked if we could share it because it was just such a cool picture of the wonderpuss.
No, these are marvelous animals, and it lives in the same habitat as the so-called mimic octopus, which occurs in the same area, and they actually overlap. The mimic octopus, we have studied it pretty extensively in field trips. Mark Norman has also studied it, and the mimic octopus, we have good data showing that the mimic octopus will mimic flounders in those open sandy areas. I mean, we saw over 500 episodes of that mimicry in a single week of diving with 15 volunteers. So the octopus is turning into a flounder all the time when it has to move across an open area. And so it's not camouflaged relative to the background, it's camouflaging its identity. It's looking like a flounder. And this is not easy for an octopus, which seems to have these radial arms. They fold all the arms behind them, which makes the animal look flat like a flounder. And they swim along with the eyeballs forward, like the two eyes on a flounder. And they actually wiggle their body at the same frequency as the flounders. It's absolutely incredible imitation. And so that's what these animals do when they live out in nowhere where there's nowhere to hide. It's just beautiful to watch.
That's incredible. All right, we'll jump into our questions here. Christopher is asking, he says he's going to be studying artificial intelligence starting in January. And he is asking, are you or have you considered working with computer science to create a new partigram based using cephalopods, giving they're more intelligent than we generally realize?
Well, I'm not doing it myself because I'm not smart enough. And yeah, but I have colleagues who are doing this. And several years ago, 2019, I was invited to give a TED talk, and I made that one of the themes. And the theme is this: if you look at, now we're looking globally, like Sylvia does so well all the time. Let's look at planet Earth and say, which brain structure has evolved to the highest degree and can provide the greatest diversity of complex behaviors? And humans are probably right up there, right? No one's going to argue that too much. But if you look at the evolutionary tree, so that vertebrate line is very well studied. Way back 500 million years ago, one group took a left turn and eventually turned into an octopus and a cuttlefish and a squid. And it turns out that they also have complex behavior, but they are not at all in that vertebrate line. So they have managed to create a brain and a set of sensory capabilities that produce complex behavior. So now you have the only other model that we know of a brain that has created some form of intelligence. And so the AI people, I kind of put the idea out there to the audience, and I said, hey, you know, the AI community always tells me we only have one model for our AI, and it's human intelligence. Now they're beginning to look at least to a few other animals, but if you want to look at the one the farthest away that is the weirdest, it's got to be our animals, these cephalopods. And so I think the AI can take ideas from what's found out about the structure of the octopus brain, for example, and how it produces decision-making and high-level cognition. And that's going to be a different story almost for sure, but no data. So I can't predict such a thing, but these animals always have wonderful surprises. So that's one AI connection, but people are looking at other cognitive abilities and other ways to use AI to try and learn how these animals move, a little bit about how they change color. There are a lot of things that these animals do that humans would like to do, but AI is a wonderful, strong tool. And it's already revolutionized a lot of things. And I think the cephalopods, among others, will benefit from smart people doing this. So I certainly encourage Christopher to keep pushing in that direction.
So Roger, do you think we're intelligent enough to look at cephalopods for some reason other than sushi and calamari and whatever else it is that we do, to just think of them as something to eat or turn into fish meal? Or
yes, I think there are groups doing that.
they're not doing that to us, but we're doing it to them.
Well, exactly. But let me give you another example of how you can look at something like an octopus can do, that if you can not kill the animals, but study the animal enough to understand the principle of operation and then translate it, that's the world we're living in here in biotechnology. And so we have a grant studying the octopus arm and the suckers. And the question is, how is that arm controlled? How flexible is it? How sensory capable is it? And what can we learn from the octopus arm that humans would want to extract and make better tools? For example, a soft robotic arm. There are no soft robotic arms that humans have figured out how to make yet. Everything have stiff things and joints, right?
Right.
Imagine, you know, going into the human body, you know, doing the GI tract, you would want a softer, flexible arm. And, you know, there are engineers making arms and things now based on our work in the lab of others that are figuring out ways to make a more flexible arm, flexible throughout its whole length, not just at certain joints. You want to get away from that joint issue. And so that's an example of people in the Navy is funding a lot of this basic research so that engineers work together with them. And there's been a lot of progress just in the last 3 years. So I think there's an example of some people doing really positive things without killing a lot of animals and harvesting them, eating them. You don't need but a few animals to do this work.
So George is asking, I'd like to hear Roger's insights on what the latest intel on how octopus has so much intelligence in their DNA. Will we ever be able to use CRISPR in humans that maybe could help the pseudo-modern man do a better job at the only tasks we had if we were better shepherds for our life support system? So what about
a lot of territory in that question?
that was a good one.
CRISPR is a new technique. For those who don't know it, it's a molecular technique in which you can you can insert a gene or you can ablate a gene and see what the resulting function is. So this connects you from gene to behavior. You know, in the world of how animals are made, this is like the biggest stretch there is, and one of the biggest challenges in all of neuroscience. But now, with some knowledge of genomes, and by the way, finally, scientists who study our animals have gotten busy and published the octopus genome, and the squid genome is just coming out right now, and the cuttlefish genome is about to be done, one other species. So we got some genomic information which will help a variety of questions. But this CRISPR thing right here at the Marine Biological Lab, there are folks, Josh Rosenthal and Carrie Albertin and others who have the gene information and beginning to apply the CRISPRs to, if you want to understand how the chromatophores create the skin pattern, chromatophores are the pigmented cells that change the color and the pattern, then you can find one gene that creates, let's say, the red chromatophores, and you can ablate that, and you can see the result in the animal's appearance later on. So you can, and then you can measure the light difference that's going on. So once you start to understand that, you can understand how to create artificial pigments and how to put them into not living tissue necessarily, but models of things that could change color. Wouldn't everyone listening like to be able to change the color of their clothes or their car? Humans would love to fiddle around with changing their appearance, even with their, you know, the clothes they wear.
Yeah.
So that's a fun application, but there are a lot of serious applications where soldiers would like to be better camouflaged, for example.
Sure.
So the idea is if you can learn that fundamental thing, CRISPR is a tool that can help you understand what role the pigments play versus the reflectors. So
Right.
I don't want to get didactic here, but animals have color in the skin, and there are only two ways to produce basic color with these chemicals. One is with pigments like a paint. You know, a red paint is red because all the colors are absorbed except red. That's what pigments do. They kind of wipe out all the other colors that are there. Reflectors don't absorb anything. You know, there's just shiny stuff. It just reflects light. And that's on the nanostructure of how it's made and how it manipulates photons as it hits the surface. It's the combination of the two that allows you to play this game with any animal or any color pattern you want to work with, whether it's peacocks or squids. And, you know, getting back to what we can do with CRISPR is we can say, what's the role of the pigment versus the reflector at the nanoscale, or let's say the pixel size in the screen we're all looking at right now? How can you play around with that the way the animal does it so much more elegantly? And maybe we can make a better technology. And that's where CRISPR can play one example of a role.
Excellent. All right, we're coming up close to the top of the hour, but we're going to try to work in two more questions quickly. Victoria's asking, she's wondering if Roger is part of the Octonation, patrons of the amazing organization that worked hard to create awareness about these amazing creatures. Have you heard of Octonation?
Yes, I'm a sideline observer. I'm afraid my science and research and field work make long weeks, so I can't get involved in all the things I'd like to.
I know the feeling. Yeah, exactly.
I just don't do that. I think it's great that people are excited about these animals and they're looking at them and admiring them. And I think that eventually gets them around to some of Sylvia's germane thoughts of, hey, how does that really fit into planet Earth or planet Ocean? And start thinking of it that way. So sorry, maybe when I retire, but I'm not going to retire.
You're not going to retire. None of us are retiring.
I guess I'm never going to get the Octonation until there are more hours in the day.
But they are more important alive than dead.
In our last question from Stephanie, the documentary Octopus Teacher opened my eyes about the octopus species. Where is the best place, in your opinion, to research or get more information about cephalopods?
Good question. I have published 2 podcasts on My Octopus Teacher, in which I've been asked to analyze many of the scenes in there. I just gave a paper at a meeting, the dive meeting, and the title of my paper was My Octopus Teacher, Amplified. What I did was I took segments of the film, which I know inside and out by now, And then I took scientific papers and information that we have that would amplify some of the things that they just touched on in the movie and showed some of the really one or two really cool things that the animals do that they could have put in and they didn't. So I was amplifying what was already there. That was the purpose of the talk. And that was a lot of fun. It was actually very hard to do. But there are things out there. There are some books on cephalopods. I've published a book called Cephalopod Behavior. It's an academic book, but it's very readable by everyone. And that was published by Cambridge University in 2018. And a book that I gave a signed copy to Sylvia a few years ago when I saw her, which is called Octopus, Cuttlefish, and Squid.
Yes.
Visual scientific guide, yes.
It's right
A
over
visual
there.
scientific guide to the ocean's most advanced invertebrate. So two colleagues and I, published that book because we wanted to get a coffee table book out there that wasn't just pictures. We wanted the good pictures, but we wanted the really cool scientific facts. And we only stuck with facts, not the dream stuff that people all think these animals do. And so that book is published by University of Chicago Press 2018. There are other books, Cy Montgomery published, her book, The Soul of the Octopus. There are other books out there, a book called Other Minds by Peter Godfrey Smith. There's another book out there that's easy to get on Amazon or anywhere else. There's an octopus book out there. There's a couple cognition papers. Those are a little too scientific. The ones I mentioned are the main ones that have come out somewhat recently, where you can get some authentic information that's science-based. Not that everything I mentioned was science-based, but mostly.
And I think one of the best things people can do is just to, take the plunge, put on the mask and snorkel, or learn to scuba and get out there and look for those guys, look for something that looks a little bit, is it reef? Is it not? And maybe they'll put up their little arm and and you can dive in with them directly.
I'll tell you, anyone I've ever seen who's been diving and saw their first squid or octopus or cuttlefish, they just come up aghast, just gaga, they're going, I can't
Giddy.
believe what that animal did. His
Yeah.
colors, his flashing colors, it was watching me. And, they realize that these animals have a sensory arsenal that's really incredible. Their eyes are very, very good. And they're really scoping you out and they're assessing you for sure. You're a potential predator, something as big as us coming underwater to see 1 pound octopus. They got to make a decision whether to hide, camouflage, hit the road, or whatever. And they do it very quickly. I mean, these animals have short and long-term memory that is very, very fast and refined. So they do a lot of things that ravens and other really so-called higher level vertebrates do. And once you study it and you learn the sophistication of it, it's really wowing the scientific world. I mean, even the vertebrate biologists in the world are beginning to really believe that our invertebrate cephalopods are pretty good, even compared to their best animals. So
I've seen them out in the wild, and they kind of like cross their arms like this. And we saw some at the aquarium. I had my kids there and they went up to the squid in the aquarium and they kind of went like this. And the squids did exactly the same thing back at them. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's right. So
they were all just like, oh.
It's really cool. There's no doubt about
Very
it.
cool.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm a little biased, of course, but the animals really are remarkable. And we've had a lot of students come into the field. The field of cephalopod biology has really expanded enormously during my career. And it's wonderful to see that some of the best, brightest, talented students have really gotten into studying these animals, bringing the most modern techniques and approaches. I'm very optimistic what's happening in our understanding of the science involved in what these animals actually do. And
So I think you could be blamed for that, Roger, or given credit for that.
Or both.
Your lifetime of observations and work as a scientist has really, really made a difference. And having you join us today has been such a privilege. Thank you.
We're so grateful to you for taking the time to join us. And before we close out today, Again, thank you, Roger, sharing all your
Sea stories.
sea stories, cephala
It
stories.
was my pleasure all the way. I just loved working with you folks, and you're doing great work. And you know, you're communicating with that big audience out there. We really need that. So congratulations on all you've done. And Sylvia, your entire career, you've been the real leader in this on a national and international basis. So greatly admire the work you've done. Keep it up. Liz, you've been making it all happen too. And you've got your own thing that you've been doing with all the, underwater toys.
Yeah.
Submarines, onward and
Submarines,
downward.
more to come. We really want to get you and kids and Sylvia and kids and everybody out there with submersibles and
Yeah.
have you have people see these animals for the first time and really come to know them.
Well, I'm
And
really happy to be here. So thanks for the invite.
yeah, and water does connect us all. And we thank everyone for joining us in today and the people that keep coming back and joining us on Dive In. We're grateful to everyone. And we're going to be back next time to talk with Rebecca Johnson as we dive into nudibranch
Nudies.
November.
Nudivember.
Until then, remember, take care of the ocean.
As if your life depends on it, because
It
it
does.
does.
It does. We'll see you next time. Thank you again, Roger.
Good. Thank you.
Now.